Welcome to day 3 of AIGA's Design and Business Conference. Thank you for joining us. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Bennie F. Johnson, AIGA's Executive Director, and today's guest, Attica Jaques, Head of Global Brand Marketing, Consumer Apps at Google. Bennie.
Good morning and welcome everyone to our Fireside Chat, our AIGA Fireside Chat with business leaders, design and brand leaders, conversations with a digital spark. This morning, it's an incredible pleasure to not only close out our 2021 AIGA Design and Business Conference with a brand builder, a global citizen, a champion, and an all-around seeker of awesomeness, the amazing Attica. It's been an incredible week, and we've learned a lot about the power of design and brand in business. But today we're going to have a conversation with someone who has really lived and championed the course of global brand management and development. Attica serves as the head of global brand marketing for Google. So I'd like to thank you. Attica, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So good to be here with you, Bennie, and the whole AIGA community.
Well, Attica, as we get started, you've had the really powerful career opportunity to work in global marketing and work with communities across the world. From time in New York and Japan and spending time in managing teams in Latin America and Asia and Africa. We've had an incredible global experience, but coming back to Google is really kind of coming home for you to San Francisco. So as we get started, I'd love people to find a bit more about our guest origin story. So I'm going to ask you to think back to coming back to San Francisco. You attended the San Francisco High School of the Arts. So tell us a bit about your start as Attica, the high schooler, exploring art, and what has kind of driven your path to these creative brands.
Absolutely. Well, you're really doing your homework because we're dipping all the way back to high school. So thanks for that. Yeah, it has been a homecoming, this past year and a half. I was born in Berkeley. I am the daughter of two incredible activists who both lived and worked and did their activism around the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley. And quite honestly, I think I was always sort of taught to follow your passion.
Right.
And for me, that led to being, active in sports, in dance, in theater, in drama. And that led me to being able to apply for San Francisco School of the Arts. And being in San Francisco with just a truly diverse, especially back then, truly diverse community, and even more diversity as we all kind of came together with a love for the arts.
So you think about that experience. What do you take from there that's kind of drawn you to your career of really being at some great design-driven brands over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think more than anything, I've always wanted to understand the balance, which is probably why we're all in creative careers. And I heard in a talk that you recently did as well, but the importance of being able to express that creativity, but then also having a seat at the table strategically, right? And understanding how those two things go hand in hand, both strategy, the reason for being, what you want to drive, the connections that you can create, and then how that comes to life through a creative experience. So I've always been drawn quite a bit to that. And there were only a few places that I could think of that actually married those two strengths around strategy and creative. And that was in marketing. I definitely had a little early entree into working through that. And then at that time, wanted to be at the place where I thought I could learn the most. Okay. And, back when we were growing up in the 90s, that was New York. That you went to New York and really got your marketing chops. And so I moved to New York right after undergrad and had the opportunity to work within the fashion industry for many, many years that really brought together, both growth in some of the fashion industry, but then also being able to work through strategy and being able to think about how that's brought to life through experiences.
This is really powerful, kind of that art. Now, we were talking and laughing a bit about how we start jobs and we have our careers and try to explain to our family what we're doing and how we're doing. And
Yeah,
what we have in common is at the end of 2019, we both started new jobs. Right, Tam? I
that's
started
right.
here at AIGA, and I remember you were starting at Google. And so the question we were talking about the other day is, how do you really tell your family and your friends what it's like to do marketing for Google? Right? In the space of with many other products and brands, people immediately understand the kind of who, what, when, where, how. When we think about Google's ever presence, what is it like to serve as the head of brand marketing for Google?
Yeah, really good question. And I can honestly say that my family's never really asked, which is interesting. And I think part because so much of what we do when we're thinking about discovery in terms of human truth and understanding, behavior, obviously we at Google, we have a lot of data that enables us to think about, what are some of the search trends? I mean, even this morning, we all have access to it, but looking through like what are top of mind for people right now? We are in the US at least, people are starting to think about, how they can get out in the world, and then we're also cognizant that in other places in the world, they are grappling with some of what we were, 4 or 5 months ago. So I love being able to understand what human behavior and thought. I also have a background in psychology, and really for me it usually starts there, and that's usually the work that people don't see, right?
Right.
When we're in marketing, it's the how did we get here, what is that human truth, what's the insight, and what's the power of the product that we have to actually create an experience with our user or our consumers or our audience or just people, and we are also people. So what's nice is I think in our worlds is we have all that work that's happening behind the scenes.
Right.
And then we also have somewhat of a product that we can experience after. That's something that's either tangible that you can either see or feel. We just recently launched at the Oscars a story that was really around accessibility. And it was actually a story of a Googler, who had two deaf parents. And when you have a deaf parent, you're called a coda. And he told his story, shared his story with us, and actually talk about his passion around accessibility and making Google products, more accessible. And there was just like a human truth in that we could all relate to, but at the same time, it was his story, and it allowed us to see the impact of not just products, but just the world, and how he had to shape how he communicates with his parents, how he had to shape, the how he could communicate with his parents in a pandemic with his child, and we were able to bring that story to life. So we're lucky that we get to, all those months that we were working on something, and here it is, the world gets to experience it and hopefully be inspired as we reflect some of the stories that we see happening in the world.
Yeah, it's been, storytelling has been kind of a bedrock of your creative practice and career and leadership. It's interesting to hear how you're taking in this role, being able to take the data to drive the stories as well that situate the product in the world. Is that something that you see championing more in marketing and the connection of design and marketing? Do you see these kind of deeper stories being a roadmap for the future?
Yeah, what's interesting, I think we've always done it,
Right.
within marketing. I think we were probably a lot slower. I think the pace that the world is moving in now,
Right.
it does require us to have a pulse, that is a lot more in real time. And obviously, social media helps us do that. We we are also, there's a lot of futurist thinking in terms of, how do we start to design for the future, right? I know many of us are really thinking about the world, the new world that we're going to have, and I get really excited with what's possible and the innovation that's going to come out of the pandemic. I mean, even the fact that we're here today, able to have a global audience, you and I are on different sides of the United States, and we can have an intimate conversation. I just think about all of the innovation that's going to come out of the necessity that we're in today, in terms of how we stay connected, in terms of how we create products that are meaningful and can positively impact people's lives. I think that for me, that part is super exciting.
It really is. We look at kind of the breakthroughs that are in front of us, and the ways in which we have kind of our shared experience now, tools and resources that can help shape a new world. I want to go back for a second, our conversation about kind of this global experience, because I don't want to pass over this.
Yeah.
How is it to in today's marketplace to champion a brand at a macro level, which all the requirements that you have that go along with a brand, it's kind of visual expression, the master stories, but then to work dynamically in a way that's still authentic and respectful of kind of local proximity and stories? What's your advice to our audience now as they work as individual designers and creative leaders in marketing, of how they can have this nexus of the balance of the macro brand story to global level with this local specificity?
Yeah, really good question. It's so funny. When I lived in Japan and Tokyo, I wrote a white paper because we were grappling, not we, the world was grappling, brands were grappling with how do we have a global brand and can grow globally, but still keep local relevance, right? And it's important both culturally, both in terms of like the touch points that we have to communicate. And I think, working so hard doing the mental gymnastics of like, how do we do that really well? And at the time that I was working for Gap, there was, we had somewhat maxed out our growth within the US. Right. So as we looked at expanding globally, it was expanding through Asia, expanding through emerging markets. We had a very small footprint even through Europe, for example. So there was this huge growth opportunity, but at the same time, you can also start to lose some of the identity of your brand in the journey of growth. So I kind of wrote a white paper. I think it was more for myself, but I was like, oh, this might actually be useful for others, and I think it kind of boils down to, I think, identity, and really being able to understand the identity and the makeup of your brand, so that you can understand what are the things that we do and say, how do we want people to feel, what are the products that are most important that best reflect, our brand. And then also thinking a lot about our audience, and what are the intersection of our shared values. What are the things that we have in common? What are the things that kind of, make us united? And then what are the things that are also very important from a cultural relevance standpoint? Right. And how can we also shine a light there? So I think whenever you can kind of bring together identity, shared values, and then the things that make people special and tailor that, I think that's where you get really global brand strength, but then also local relevance.
It's interesting as I hear you talk through the question about macro brand and local brand experience. It strikes me that if I take away the question in there, you've really also given a recipe for building internal culture in an organization as well, about what brings us together and what separates in there. And one of the things I was mentioning to Attica earlier that I've always admired about Advocate is the way she's been a champion within organizations. I've seen the way she's worked with brands and teams, but also mentees and other colleagues and helping them grow. I'd love to get a sense of, your thoughts around being that executive sponsor. That so many times when we're working in organizations, we want to have the champion who's been there before us, who can help elevate us. And I've seen you serve in that capacity so many times. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's almost like when you reflect back, know, and then you actually realize that you were intentional. Right. I think it was easy for me to be intentional about giving others a voice because I also had that. I had incredible mentors, who did that. I think we've also had ones who didn't, and we also know what that feels like. We know what it feels like to be championed or to be silenced. and you make choices and you're intentional about what kind of leader that you want to be. And then I've had the opportunity to be in those spaces so that I can champion others. I remember, some of the work, as I was head of marketing for Gap Japan, and at that time, and I think it really has changed quite a bit, but a lot of women dropped out of the workforce, so you didn't see as many women in senior leadership positions. And I kind of looked around and I thought, we actually have a lot of women who deserve to be in these senior leadership positions. And so we, promoted, 2 directors. We had a general manager who had a woman who was like incredible as the CFO, right? Of really being able to reflect, the importance of diversity within our leadership team, and so for me to be a champion of that was honestly just giving voice to it, but people who deserve to be in the places that they were. But yeah, I think it is about being intentional, but then also celebrating and the fact that we've all had champions,
Right.
and knowing what that feels like and being that intentional leader who's going to champion others.
Which is really powerful advice, to have as we think about our space and understand our own kind of leadership space as you're kind of moving through, to know that others are looking and modeling after you as well, and having that continuation. One of the things that you've been able to really craft a progressive career, working with top brands and finding spaces that you're able to combine both your purpose and your passion. I'd love to ask you a bit about your thoughts on choices, on making those choices on what we do and what we don't do.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I think it also boils back down to identity and being clear on what you're passionate about, what gives you excitement, because I think you get so much strength when you're excited and passionate about the work that you're doing. When I graduated college, I was, at the time really interested and passionate about the fashion industry, really wanted to understand more there. When I went on to Under Armour, obviously, very passionate about sport, and particularly, as I joined, I was heading up women's and youth sport, in 2 areas that I was also very passionate about, and I think that those roles tend to find you. Right. Because you have a genuine passion and you tend to be good at it. And then obviously there's always a knowledge gap, and you bring that with you and that experience and that learning, but you cannot trade. I mean, we've all seen when we've had creatives that are working on a project that they're just incredibly passionate about, and it shows through on the work. The same is true, I think, in terms of career. I had no idea where I would be led, by following some of that passion, to be honest. So I don't think I ever road mapped out, go to this organization or this organization. And then I think that's where also shared values come to play too. Right. If you kind of know what brings you that passion, and then you're looking for organizations or sometimes work or people that share some of those values, I think it brings you to natural stepping stones for your career.
Right. It's really great. It kind of feels like you're talking about a gravity that's kind of pulling you into the spaces that make sense. So do you have any advice for times in which we defy the gravity, where you kind of find yourself doing something that's outside of the path that you've been drawn into? Any thoughts for our audience on that?
Yeah, it's funny. As I was talking about the stepping stones, I for some reason I realized, like, I forgot, like, the leaps and falling in the water and, like, all of the, the stumbling and getting back up, that it does mean that you may not always feel comfortable as you're following things that you're passionate about, that you may fall down, you may get back up. For me, as a Black woman going to Japan and leading, pretty much mostly a Japanese staff, there were obviously cultural differences, and I had to understand a lot culturally, but it was by far one of the most rewarding experiences, but it was also by far one of the most uncomfortable. You
Right.
know, so I think there's a lot of growth that happens in being uncomfortable, even though you're following that passion. You know, I for sure have such an interest in, different cultures and understanding, how the impact that we can have in some of the shared values there. But it doesn't mean that it was always comfortable and it wasn't
Right.
as easy as, a stepping stone. So I think, being able to take leaps is really important, in career. And then knowing that if it doesn't work out, you're in control. You're a free agent and you can continue to grow in that experience and move on if you need to. But I absolutely 100% have just loved being slightly uncomfortable, taking those leaps of faith, but being carried by, the passion and the optimism through it all.
Which is really, really powerful. One of the things that over the years you've had a lot of experience doing is working with marketing leaders, brand, creative, and agencies from a lot of different backgrounds on projects. And in our conference this week, we've been looking at that intersection, that kind of handoff in the relationship between client and agency, between in-house and external support. I'd love your thoughts on what do you look for in an active design partner, creative partner, or agency? I mean, in your experience, what are the things that really set them apart for and set you up for a great partnership?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Worked with a ton of agencies. In my career, we even within Google have an agency that's in-house. So like worked in so many different types of models. I think first and foremost is a curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And a curiosity to understand the world, a curiosity to understand the business, a curiosity to sort of understand an audience, that we're either going after or have. But I think being incredibly curious there. The other part is being passionate, which we talked a little bit about already, but being passionate about that business. And then, one of the reasons why brands look for agencies is they're also looking for people who can show them their blind spots, right? That, once you kind of get into your world and you may have like depth of knowledge, I think we're also still looking for like, what are we not thinking of? How can we see it in a new way, in a new perspective? I definitely don't necessarily want to look for agencies who are going to do exactly what we ask or something that we could have done, but they're bringing in new additional perspectives that actually make the work better. And then the last one is collaboration. I think, so much we're always thinking about, agency client relationship, and for sure that's there, but I think everyone feels like the best work that they've ever done, it's really been collaborative, in the process. So those would probably be the top three things that I look for.
Well, it's a really great list to kind of think through. And we were joking earlier that sometimes as the client, we don't know what we need, but we often know exactly what we don't need.
Yes. Yeah.
That space in there, and seeing if you have an agency partner who doesn't kind of project these things that we've talked about, then that it becomes a challenge longer term. One of the things that, we've talked a lot about is kind of passion and purpose. And the way that passion and purpose can work with your brand and your role to then move into social impact and advocacy. And there have been lots of kind of moments and things that I've seen you be really passionate about and take that into the work. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the landscape is changing today for brands and this kind of social impact and advocacy. That's been a part of the work that we do individually, but where are the crossroads where brands get to express the things that we take deeply personally?
Yeah, that's right. It's it's interesting. I think we've also been in a world where brands didn't talk about social purpose, right? But before, I remember when I was at Gap, the Fishers did a ton of work, through Gap Foundation, whether it was, helping on research around AIDS, whether it was, gender equity. But they had a very big belief that, the service that you do it quietly, and you do it because you truly believe in it, but you don't do it for getting quote unquote credit. And then there was a time as we were shaping like who the brand was, like that's a big part of who the brand was in how we give, how we, use Gap to elevate the things that we cared about. So it was, I remember it was very hard to get them to be okay, with doing that. And then started doing things like Project Red, and partnering with Bono and, that community of creating product with purpose, right? And that was a huge leap, way back then for the brand, but that was really the entree to it. But it's like, we have history in doing this, and now we can actually talk about it, and we can also invite our audience in to help solve the problem with us, and that's where I think the magic happens. So yeah, I mean, and now there's a complete evolution of, if you are not leading with purpose and, social consciousness, people will call you out. What do you stand for? What do you believe in? And how are you helping? So I think now it's an imperative, and it's been an evolution of people and brands getting more and more comfortable with that. But I think that's also, how people want to see themselves reflected in brands. And that's how they get to a place of, true loyalty and loving and advocacy and actually caring about the brand that they are either shopping or spending their time with. So I personally love it because that is like the human spirit. We're kind of driven by purpose, and being able to articulate it and do work that reflects that or inspires that is amazing. We recently at Google, worked on a project called Search Black Owned. We all know that in the pandemic, particularly in the US, Black owned businesses were declining at a much higher rate, than any other business. And, we wanted to help. So one of the ways, we had many ways, but one of the ways was being able to find Black owned businesses, making sure they're online. And we also saw the growth of those businesses when consumers were able to identify them. So we, I'm taking it very local now, but we did a partnership with Stephen Curry, and we asked him to support one Black owned business. And, he obviously has a passion of supporting everything in Oakland, and he actually supported 3 of his favorite businesses. And, we created some content that just did incredibly well, but more importantly, we were actually able to shine a light on those businesses and help them thrive. And so I think that's where, shared values and passion and purpose can all manifest into something that has an impact in the community.
So a little question about, where do you find inspiration as a leader today?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go far. It's somewhat all around us. I think about even today when we think about the resiliency of people, we have all gone through going through a pandemic, and some are harder hit than others, but we're all experiencing it in some ways, and I think I find a lot of inspiration in that resiliency, find a lot of inspiration, hopefully, in the innovation that's going to come out of this.
Right.
I'm excited about that. And then also knowing that, we have to also give each other strength because, our friends in India and Brazil, and, they're getting incredibly hard hit, in the pandemic and aren't quite through it yet. But I find strength and inspiration, close to home as always, and also afar from different experiences. So it's all around us. And part of it too is, you also want to think about how do you also reflect some of that in the work,
right?
Because it's kind of what's important. How do you reflect that and inspiring other people? So I think always having a good hand in what's happening in the world around us is always like the biggest point of inspiration.
And then my last question to that, what emboldens you today?
Well, lots of things. So probably my 4-year-old son who's curious and wild. And then even moments, that we've had, we just recently, a couple of weeks, announced partnership with the WNBA. And, as we look at the data, and when you see things like, only 4% of media are going to support women's sports, and you think about the delta, of that and the inequities, from a gender standpoint, those are the things that you think not only can we help, but we should, and hopefully we can inspire other brands to do the same. And the thing that was exciting about that is, we just talked about the partnership, but I remember getting so many emails from creatives, from agencies of, hey, how can we help? We'd be excited to work, on this project that actually brings some of the storytelling to life. I think those are moments that kind of embolden me for us to take bigger leaps and chances, but doing it with, it's the right thing to do. We all can help with gender equity, and particularly within sport.
It's really, if I were to ask you for just a bit of advice for my emerging design leaders, my emerging brand and marketing leaders, as you think back over your journey and the active journey that you have now, is there anything that you would like to say to encourage them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first one is, just to be daring. We're at a time in the world where, we need new ideas to transform how we're communicating, how we're experiencing, and, focusing on what's been done before is a safe roadmap. But I think we're at an inflection point that we can be daring, and I think that will be the work that you're most proud of when you look back on it, was when you took that leap. Make sure that there's equal parts, purpose and passion and curiosity that ground the work in information and data, but don't forget to wrap that in meaning. Don't forget to wrap that in emotion. Don't forget to wrap that in things that are purpose driven. I think those are the biggest ones. And then the other is also collaborate. I think we're so much better when we actually have diverse perspectives. I think one of the things I noticed when I got to Google is, we're always, on Google Docs, and, sometimes there's 30 people in your documents. And at first it was very weird for me. It's like, okay, there's a lot of points of view coming out, but I'm like, wow, the richness of that perspective, that point of view, even in a world where you can't be together, has been incredibly rewarding. So I think the collaboration at every step of the process is an important part of the creative journey.
It truly is. Attica, I just want to thank you for sharing this journey. Advertising Aid said that you were one of the top 30 women to watch in advertising. And I thank you for allowing us, the AIGA and design community, to get a chance to look in and watch your journey from our conversations of high school through global brands, through making meaning and giving us input for the future. It's been incredible to have a chance to sit down and talk to you. I love the way that you've always integrated passion, creativity, and brilliance. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benny. And you've always been an inspiration. All of the work that you are doing and the impact that you have driven with the AIGA community. I was on your site last night and thinking about audience and just looking at all the work. And I really loved, one of the things that I think we share in common, but, on the site you have, no matter who you are one of us. And I think that sense of community and belonging and celebration of individuality is just really inspiring. So thank you, and thank your community.
Thank you, Attica, and thank you all for joining us for this Fireside Chat.